The Kingdom of Bavaria was a German state that existed between the years 1805 and 1918. The first king of Bavaria was King Maximilian I of Bavaria, and power remained in the hands of the Wittelsbach dynasty until its dissolution in 1918. As a state of the German Empire, Bavaria was the second largest kingdom, behind only the Kingdom of Prussia. The king was married twice and had a total of 12 children. Among these 12 were kings and queens, emperors and empresses. But today we're going to learn about the life of one of the daughters, who was born a princess with the style of royal highness, fell madly in love with Prince Miguel of Portugal, but in the end, for reasons of state, had to marry someone else who held a lower title. Thus, she married beneath her rank. And worse still, it was an extremely unhappy marriage, as we will see throughout this video. From this unhappy marriage, 10 children were born. Among them was Empress Elisabeth of Austria, better known as Sissi. She worked very hard to arrange good marriages for all her daughters, but her efforts did not yield much success, at least when it came to happiness. Today we are going to learn a bit about the life of Ludovica Wilhelmina of Bavaria. She is best known for being the mother of Empress Sissi and the sister of Archduchess Sophie. And if you've ended up here and you enjoy a good story, that's no accident. Here you will travel with me, discovering details about the lives of great historical figures and how they behaved, not only as representatives of nations and empires, but also as human beings. So go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any details. Like and share the video and leave your comment about what you thought of the life of Ludovica Wilhelmina of Bavaria. Let's get to the video. Ludovica Wilhelmina of Wittelsbach was born at Nymphenburg Palace in Munich on August 30, 1808, as a Bavarian princess, the sixth of 7 children of King Maximilian I of Bavaria and his second wife, Caroline of Baden. In addition to her 6 siblings, Ludovica had 5 other half-siblings by her father's first wife, Augusta Wilhelmina of Hesse-Darmstadt. All the siblings received an upbringing filled with affection and care, especially from their mother, Queen Caroline. She made a point of ensuring her children grew up in a family environment, but without neglecting their education, since they were princes and princesses, and without placing too much emphasis on religion. Ludovica had no interest in politics or science, but she was very interested in geography. One of her favorite hobbies was collecting watches, and she absolutely loved dogs. When she reached adolescence, she became a beautiful young woman, having inherited her mother's extraordinary beauty. She fell in love with Prince Miguel of Braganza, and at that time, no one expected him to ascend to the throne of Portugal, so their families did not allow the relationship. However, he eventually became king. Everyone says he was the great love of Ludovica's life, but fate had different plans for her, since years later they would become part of the same family. The former lovers would become in-laws, as one of Miguel's daughters, Princess Maria José of Braganza, would marry Carl Theodore, Ludovica's son. And besides not being able to marry her great love, she had to endure something like a Greek tragedy. She was forced to marry her younger sister's fiancé, who was also her second cousin, Duke Maximilian Joseph in Bavaria. This was because her sister, Princess Maximiliana Josepha Caroline, died prematurely at the age of 12. After this tragedy, they didn't want to dismiss the fiancé and decided that Ludovica would be the one to marry him. Maximilian was a very eccentric man, and they became engaged when she was 20. Ludovica had to hear from her future husband, in the most candid way possible, that he did not love her and had only agreed to the marriage out of fear of his grandfather. And although she was not in love with him either, and despised the marriage just as much as he did, neither of them could do anything to prevent it. The wedding took place at the Church of St. Quirinus on September 9, 1828. And if all that weren't enough, Ludovica was demoted from royal princess to duchess and became the poorest relative among her sisters, who managed to secure brilliant and much more advantageous marriages. One of them, Elisabeth, became Queen of Prussia. Another, Amalie Auguste, became Queen of Saxony. Caroline Augusta became Empress of Austria by marrying Emperor Francis I. And with the abdication of Ferdinand I, her sister Sophie could have become Empress of Austria if she hadn't forced her husband, whom she considered weak, to renounce his dynastic rights in favor of their eldest son, Franz Joseph. According to the memoirs of one of her granddaughters, Countess Mary Larisch, who apparently was involved in the mysterious death of her cousin, Prince Rudolf, Ludovica is said to have uttered the following curse while tossing her bridal bouquet: "This marriage and everything that comes from it shall remain without God's blessing until the end." However, many historians claim that it is unlikely she actually said this, since no contemporary source from the wedding confirmed this curse. Furthermore, it is known that Mary Larisch published several books of her memoirs about the family in order to make money, and she was famous for making up stories to sell more books. Mary Larisch was, for a time, Empress Sissi's favorite niece, but she was expelled from the court after the Empress discovered that she was involved in Rudolf's death, helping arrange his meetings with his lover, Mary Vetsera. The young couple established their official residence in Munich, and in 1834 they bought Possenhofen Palace on the shore of Lake Starnberg, where they spent the summer months and where there was no protocol or etiquette. In the early years, the couple traveled a lot through Switzerland and Italy, but Ludovica felt very unhappy. She herself confessed that she spent the entire first year of marriage crying. Maximilian could not have been more of a womanizer and a bohemian. He did not respect his wife, and everyone in Munich knew that he had lovers. It was a real humiliation for Ludovica, since he would parade his lovers around openly and had several illegitimate children with them. Even so, Ludovica became pregnant 10 times and raised 8 children to adulthood, since 2 of her children died before reaching 1 year old. Her husband had a tradition of having lunch with his illegitimate daughters, whom he adored. It took Ludovica a long time to learn how to deal with her husband's lifestyle, his infidelities, and his eccentricities. Maximilian was always an absent husband, rarely at home with her. And besides spending much of his time with his lovers and illegitimate children, he traveled a lot. He also really enjoyed getting together with his friends, artists, and bourgeois bohemians who would always gather to drink and philosophize. He even went so far as to create a club called the Round Table, which he himself led, imitating King Arthur. Ludovica, despite bearing the style of Royal Highness as a Princess of Bavaria from birth, behaved more like a bourgeois housewife than a member of the high aristocracy. After her marriage, she no longer held any official position and stopped worrying about dressing properly at home. She had hardly any servants. She herself helped the staff in the kitchen or with household chores. She was also fully responsible for raising her 8 children, which was exceptional in a noble family. All of them grew up in a liberal and carefree environment, in contact with nature and animals. She had the help of governesses and tutors, but people used to say that when they were at Possenhofen, there was no way for the children to concentrate or learn their lessons. Meanwhile, her husband led a wandering life, far from home. The Duchess did not have great political ambitions, but lived under the influence of her energetic sister, Archduchess Sophie of Austria, who was 3 years older than her. Ludovica loved her devotedly and had great admiration for her sister, for she was authoritarian and ruled the Imperial Hofburg Palace in Vienna in her own way. Out of fear of losing her favor, she strictly followed her advice and always cited her as a good example to her children. The Austrian court was a distant place for Ludovica. She also had no contact with her nephew, the then King Maximilian II of Bavaria. In her free time, she liked to amuse herself by collecting watches and studying geography. Maximilian, her husband, laughed at her and said that her knowledge of geography came from the landscape calendars hanging on the walls at home. Her children grew up freely and played with the local children, even speaking the Bavarian dialect of the region instead of standard German. The Duchess would walk for hours through the forests and meadows of Bavaria, accompanied by her children while explaining nature and animals to them. Ludovica focused especially on the training and education of her eldest daughter, Helena, who was affectionately nicknamed Nenny, because her older sister, Archduchess Sophie of Austria, had her in mind to marry her eldest son, Emperor Franz Joseph. Everything was prepared by the sisters in August 1853. Ludovica, together with her daughter Nene, was going to spend the summer in Bad Ischl, where the imperial family was on vacation. And in this way, the young people would meet and the engagement would be made official on August 18th of that same year, coinciding with the celebration of the emperor's 23rd birthday. And almost at the last moment, Ludovica decided that she would also take her other daughter, the 15-year-old Elisabeth, affectionately called Sissi. Sissi was going through a great sadness at that time. She had fallen in love with a young count named Richard, who was in her father's service. When Ludovica realized that she was in love with this young man, she quickly arranged to send him far away, but he came back. Unfortunately, he fell ill and died a few days later. Sissi was inconsolable, spending days in tears. Locked in her room, she refused to eat and kept writing to her lost love. Ludovica thought that if she took her daughter on the trip, it would cheer her up, and it would also help calm the girl, who was very nervous. And among other things, she hid the real reason for the trip, which was supposed to remain secret until the day the engagement was made official. Another reason that crossed Ludovica's mind was interest. She wanted to bring Franz Joseph's brother, Archduke Karl Ludwig, closer to Sissi, since the two were already friends and had been exchanging letters, rings, and other gifts for some time. Ludovica thought that both her daughters might return from that trip engaged. But nothing went as planned, neither for her nor for her sister Sophie, because when the emperor saw Nene, he was not charmed by her as everyone had expected. Instead, he immediately noticed her sister Sissi, under the jealous gaze of Karl Ludwig, who had to accept that his brother had taken his girlfriend from him. The same thing happened to Nene, who had to witness her sister's engagement being made official, when she should have been the protagonist. Helena had to return home as a jilted bride. One of the people most surprised by the emperor's decision, besides Sissi, was Ludovica. She was completely moved and beside herself when her sister told her the news that the emperor would not marry Nene. Ludovica thought that her daughter Sissi was not mature enough. She was only 15, and she believed she was not a pretty girl. In fact, no one understood what Emperor Franz Joseph had seen in her. But Sissi and Helene were from the same family, the same lineage. They were Catholic and nieces of Archduchess Sophie, and that was what mattered to be the emperor's fiancée. When people asked Ludovica if her daughter had been consulted about how she felt about the emperor before taking such a serious step, the duchess would always reply that one could not refuse the Emperor of Austria. And contrary to what is seen in the famous Sissi films from the 1950s, Ludovica did not approve of her daughter's lifestyle and always supported her sister, Archduchess Sophie, in the attempt to turn her into the empress she believed she should be. In many letters from Ludovica to her daughter, it is clear how she would scold Sissi and encourage her to follow the wise advice of her aunt and mother-in-law Sophie. Her daughter Elisabeth's marriage would not be the only one to give Ludovica headaches. Far from it, her eldest son, Ludwig Wilhelm, fell in love with the actress Henrietta Mendel and had to give up his dynastic rights to marry her. Meanwhile, for Nene, it seemed like an impossible task to get married after being rejected by the Emperor of Austria, and also because she was already 22 years old, which was considered quite old for that time. But Ludovica tirelessly searched for a suitor for her daughter and invited the wealthy Thurn and Taxis family to Possenhofen. The hereditary prince Maximilian immediately fell in love with Nene. However, despite being a very wealthy family, the King of Bavaria considered the Thurn and Taxis to be of low rank and not suitable to marry Nene. But thanks to Ludovica's persistence and Sissi's intervention as empress, they were finally able to get married. She tirelessly sought good marriages for her daughters, and unfortunately, except in Nene's case, all the unions she arranged were unhappy and even disastrous in some cases. Her daughter Maria Sophie would become queen after marrying the crown prince of the two Sicilies, Francis II, and this marriage took 10 years to be consummated, with infidelities on Maria's part, who even had an illegitimate daughter. Her daughter Matilda married Luigi of Bourbon II Sicilies, Count of Trani. The marriage was unhappy almost from the very beginning. Luigi sought refuge in alcohol and ended up committing suicide. When King Ludwig II of Bavaria asked for the hand of her youngest daughter, Sophie, Ludovica was overjoyed. However, after postponing the wedding date, Ludwig ended up canceling the engagement. As a result, she was even more disappointed than her own daughter, Sophie. And she hurried to find another suitor, Ferdinand of Alençon, grandson of the last king of France, who, despite his efforts, did not make her happy and even had her locked up in a psychiatric hospital. Some of Ludovica's sons were a bit luckier. Although her son Karl Theodore had married a cousin for love and she died during childbirth, leaving him a widower with a newborn daughter, Ludovica managed to arrange a second marriage for him. This time, it would be a long and happy marriage to the daughter of Miguel of Portugal, the very man who had been the first and only great love of Ludovica's life. The youngest of her sons, Maximilian Manuel, married the woman he loved, Amalia of Saxony. They had 3 children and were very happy together. After 60 years of marriage, Duke Maximilian died on November 15, 1888, after suffering several strokes. His funeral was attended by a large crowd of people, both commoners and royalty, including his son-in-law, Emperor Franz Joseph, and Crown Prince Rudolph. Sissi did not attend her father's funeral. She was on the island of Corfu in Greece. Maximilian and Ludovica never had a happy marriage and never loved each other. She confessed to her granddaughters that her husband only began to be a more attentive and affectionate spouse after they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. It was 60 years of a disastrous married life that turned Ludovica into a sad and bitter woman. It is said that she was addicted to morphine to relieve her rheumatic pains. But even so, she was a very loving mother and grandmother until the end of her days. And whenever any of her children needed love and understanding, she was there to comfort them and bring the peace and strength that kept that large family together. And unfortunately, Ludovica had to mourn the loss of her beloved eldest daughter, Helena, who died of stomach cancer. She spent her final years surrounded by her dogs, whom she loved so much. They had complete freedom to roam around the palace. And at the very beginning of 1892, at the age of 84, she fell ill with pneumonia, from which she would not recover. She died on January 26th of that same year in Munich, surrounded by all her children except Empress Sissi, who did not attend her mother's funeral, because she preferred to stay by her daughter Marie Valerie's side, who was at the end of her first pregnancy. Although it was not a happy marriage, and during their lives they were often separated and distant from each other, Ludovica and Maximilian rest together in the crypt of the Church of St. Quirinus, the very place where many years earlier they had been married. She was the last of King Maximilian I of Bavaria's 12 children to pass away.